Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this Sunday's edition of 48 Laws of Power. This week we are covering Law 8. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. As always, I'll give my weekly disclaimer. This book is not an Islamic text. It's written by a non-Muslim and atheist at that. There will be problems with this book from a perspective of implementing what you learn and being a Muslim. And I say to you this: whatever you find problematic with the book, learn it so that you can arm yourself with knowledge of what others might want to do or use against you. Okay? Muhammad Musa, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. I'm wearing the same sweatshirt, buffering. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Dan, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. When you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. It is always better to make your opponent come to you, abandoning his own plans in the process. Lure him with fabulous gains and then attack. You hold the cards, and this is no more important than it is in war, particularly in war. Okay? As usual, there will be an observance of the law and a transgression of the law. I believe there's a transgression of the law in this one. No, there's just an observance of the law. So let's get straight into it. At the Congress of Vienna in 1814, the major powers of Europe gathered to carve up the remains of Napoleon's fallen empire. The city was full of gaiety, and the balls were the most splendid in memory. Hovering over the proceedings, however, was the shadow of Napoleon himself. Instead of being executed or exiled far away, he had been sent to the island of Elba, not far from the coast of Italy. Even imprisoned on an island, a man as bold and creative as Napoleon Bonaparte made everyone nervous. The Austrians plotted to kill him on Elba, but decided it was too risky. Alexander I, Russia's temperamental Tsar, heightened the anxiety by throwing a fit during the Congress when a part of Poland was denied him. "Beware, I shall lose the monster," he threatened. Everyone knew he meant Napoleon. Of all the statesmen gathered in Vienna, only Talleyrand, Napoleon's former foreign minister, seemed calm and unconcerned. It was as if he knew something the others didn't. Meanwhile, on the island of Elba, Napoleon's life was a mockery of his previous glory. As Elba's king, he had been allowed to form a court. There was a cook, a wardrobe mistress, an official pianist, and a handful of courtiers. All of this was designed to humiliate Napoleon, and it seemed to work. Mahdi reading to us like how he reads to his kids. That's a good one. You know what, yeah? I get this reading voice from my mum. Aya, Sakaril Bab. I get this reading voice from my mum. This is how my mum used to read to me. Yes, I do like to put a bit of energy into the reading, just to make it a bit more entertaining for you guys. That winter, however, there occurred a series of events so strange and dramatic they might have been scripted in a play. Elba was surrounded by British ships, their cannons covering all possible exit points. Learn Arabic images, I appreciate it. I'm glad you're benefiting. Yet, somehow, in broad daylight on the 26th of February 1815, a ship with 900 men on board picked up Napoleon and put to sea. The English gave chase, but the ship got away. This almost impossible escape astonished the public throughout Europe and terrified the statesmen at the Congress of Vienna. Although it would have been safer to leave Europe, Napoleon not only chose to return to France, he raised the odds by marching on Paris with a tiny army in hopes of recapturing the throne. His strategy worked. People of all classes threw themselves at his feet. An army under Marshal Ney sped from Paris to arrest him, but when the soldiers saw their beloved former leader, they changed sides. Napoleon was declared emperor again. Volunteers swelled the ranks of his new army. Delirium swept the country. In Paris, crowds went wild. The king who had replaced Napoleon fled the country. For those of you who are acquainted with your history, that king was known as the bourgeois, or the bourgeois king, King Louis the something. He's mentioned in this book as well. He made a bunch of mistakes. One of those mistakes was allowing himself to resemble the common folk in a bad way. So he resembled a banker more than a king, and the French were not used to this. The French were used to having pompous, aristocratic type emperors and kings. And then when this Louis came along, trying to pretend to be one of them, when they knew, the public, they knew full well he wasn't one of them, it backfired tremendously. So if you're going to try and adorn or the common touch or be like a commoner, make sure you really are one. Because if you're not, people will see right through you, and that's what happened to that Louis. And his entire court folded up like a circus and left town, just like that, as soon as Napoleon returned. For the next 100 days, Napoleon ruled France. Soon, however, the giddiness subsided. France was bankrupt, its resources nearly exhausted, and there was little Napoleon could do about this. At the Battle of Waterloo in June that year, he was finally defeated for good. This time, his enemies had learned their lesson. They exiled him to the barren island of St. Helena, off the west coast of Africa. There, he had no more hope of escape. Interpretation. Only years later did the facts of Napoleon's dramatic escape from Elba actually come to light. Before he decided to attempt this bold move, visitors to his court had told him that he was more popular in France than ever, and that the country would embrace him again. One of these visitors was Austria's General Koller, who convinced Napoleon that if he escaped, the European powers, England included, would welcome him back into power. Napoleon was tipped off that the English would let him go, and indeed his escape occurred in the middle of the afternoon, in full view of English spyglass. Meaning what? Meaning this was staged, this was allowed. What Napoleon didn't know was that there was a man behind it all, pulling all the strings, and that this man was his former minister, Talleyrand. And Talleyrand was doing all this not to bring back the glory days, but to crush Napoleon once and for all. Considering the emperor's ambition unsettling to Europe's stability, he had turned against him long ago. When Napoleon was exiled to Elba, Talleyrand had protested. Napoleon should be sent farther away, he argued, or Europe would never have peace. But no one listened. Instead of pushing his opinion, Talleyrand bided his time, working quietly. He eventually won over Castlereagh and Metternich, the former ministers of England and Austria. Together, these men baited Napoleon into an escape. Even Koller's visit to whisper the promise of glory in the exile's ear was part of the plan. He knew Napoleon would fall for the trap he had set. He also foresaw that Napoleon would lead the country into a war which, given France's weakened condition, could only last a few months. One diplomat in Vienna who understood that Talleyrand was behind it all said, "He has set the house ablaze in order to save it from the plague." He's brought Napoleon back, and they didn't want Napoleon back in power. They didn't want him back. But they set the house ablaze in order to save the country from the plague, in order to actually get rid of him once and for all. He knew, Talleyrand knew, bringing Napoleon back, although it was risky, Napoleon would inevitably want to go straight back into war again because that was his nature. But France's depleted state was unbeknownst to Napoleon. Napoleon wasn't fully aware of the fiscal condition of the country. So he knew that very quickly his reign would end once and for all, but this time they would completely banish him. They would learn their lesson, and he would have the power to completely banish him, which is what happened. Otto von Bismarck said, "When I have laid bait for deer, I don't shoot at the first doe that comes to sniff." I believe doe is a female deer or a baby deer. One of you guys can let me know. "But wait until the whole herd has gathered." So he'll lay the bait, but then don't shoot straight away. As soon as you see one, let them all come around. And he can shoot them all off one by one and have a feast instead of just one. Keys to power. How many times has this scenario played itself out in history? An aggressive leader initiates a series of bold moves that begin by bringing him much power. Slowly, however, his power reaches a peak, and soon everything turns against him. His numerous enemies band together, and trying to maintain his power, he exhausts himself, going in this direction and that. Inevitably, he collapses. Where are we? The reason for this pattern is that the aggressive person is rarely in full control. He cannot see more than a couple of moves ahead, cannot see the consequences of this bold move or that one, because he is constantly being forced to react to the moves of his ever-growing host of enemies and to the unforeseen consequences of his own rash actions. His aggressive energy is turned against him, just like in jiu-jitsu. What is jiu-jitsu? You take someone's force, strong force, and you use it against them. You turn it against them. Women are masters of this, gentlemen. Absolute masters of baiting men into rash action. Let me say that again. Women are masters of baiting men into taking rash action. How? Women know how to pull on the emotional strings of a man with her tongue. She knows how to shame you, guilt trip you, so on and so forth. And as a result, you react. You don't respond. You react. And if you are in a constant state of reaction, you are constantly on the back foot because that individual is laying the traps for you to react to, which means by default, they are constantly one step ahead of you. When a woman baits you into having an emotional response or engaging in an argument with her, take a step back. Take a step back. No one's forcing you to respond straight away. And this is hard. Don't get me wrong. It requires training. It's very hard. You need to train yourself to not react immediately. Let the first moment pass. Wait for the second. Especially when you're dealing with women, particularly in an intimate setting. You and your wife, for example, or maybe you've got a girlfriend. But in general, this rule applies, man or woman. In the realm of power, you must ask yourself, what is the point of chasing here and there, trying to solve problems and defeat my enemies if I never feel in control? Why am I always having to react to events instead of directing them? The answer is simple. Your idea of power is wrong. You have mistaken aggressive action for effective action. And most often, the most effective action is to stay back, keep calm, let others be frustrated by the traps you lay for them. Playing for long-term power rather than quick victory. For those of you just coming in, please hit the like, make sure you sub the channel. Jazakumullah khair. We just hit 3K subs. I appreciate your support. Jazakumullah khair. I've got some new kit. I'm about to be installing it soon. Actually, you know what? I have to give a shout out to my good friend Kareem. Jazakallah khair. Wallahi, I love you for the sake of Allah, bro. He bought me like some crazy good kit, mashallah. Podcasting stuff, like I don't really know what it is, but I know that there's a mic and there's a stand thing and there's a converter thingy, and it's all high quality stuff. Allahumma barik. Jazakallah khair. Wallahi, I have to give a shout out to my brother. I appreciate it, akhi. May Allah place it in your mizan al-hasna yawm al-qiyamah. Remember, the essence of power is the ability to keep the initiative, to get others to react to your moves, to keep your opponent and those around you on the defensive. When you make other people come to you, you suddenly become the one controlling the situation. And the one who has control has power. Two things must happen to place you in this position. One, you yourself must learn to master your emotions and never be influenced by anger. Woo! That's hard. That's not easy. Where's my soundboard? Give me my soundboard. That's not easy. That's hard. Let me tell you, I should know. Flipping me with the extensive, colorful criminal record. Wouldn't I know? Hell yes, you bet I know. It is hard. It is very, very hard. controlling your emotions in the heat of the moment. I had an incident the other day where I had to really take a step back, control my emotions in the heat of that moment, because boy, I could have taken someone's head off. Alhamdulillah, I was able to, by Allah's permission. Mercy from Allah, to hold myself together. Right. So you yourself must learn to master your emotions and never be influenced by anger. Meanwhile, however, you must play on people's natural tendency to react angrily when pushed and baited. In the long run, the ability to make others come to you is a weapon far more powerful than any tool of aggression. Study how Talleyrand, the master of the art, performed this delicate trick. First, he overcame the urge to try to convince his fellow statesmen that they needed to banish Napoleon far away. He resisted that temptation because words are futile. Argumentation is futile. Futile, waste of time. It's another law of power. Never win through words, only by action. Only by action. It is only natural to want to persuade people by pleading your case, imposing your will with words. But this often turns against you. Few of Talleyrand's contemporaries believed Napoleon was still a threat, so that if he had spent a lot of energy trying to convince them, he would only have made himself look foolish, because they didn't think that Napoleon was a threat, but Talleyrand knew him well. A man who worked with him for so long, he knew his master well, much better than the rest of these ministers. But trying to convince them of this fact would only make him look like a fool. So he shut his mouth and baited Napoleon into a rash action, so that he could prove to the other ministers that what he was saying was correct. Instead, he held his tongue and his emotions in check. Most important of all, he laid Napoleon a sweet and irresistible trap. He knew the man's weakness, his impetuosity, his need for glory, and the love of the masses, and he played all this to perfection. When Napoleon went for the bait, there was no danger that he might succeed and turn the tables on Talleyrand. Who better than anyone knew France's depleted state? And even had Napoleon been able to overcome these difficulties, the likelihood of his success would have been greater were he able to choose his time and place of action. By setting the proper trap, then, Talleyrand took the time and place into his own hands. All of us have only so much energy, and there is a moment when our energies are at their peak. When you make the other person come to you, he wears himself out, wasting his energy on the trip. In the year of 1905, Russia and Japan were at war. The Japanese had only recently begun to modernize their warships, so the Russians had a stronger navy. But by spreading false information, the Japanese Marshal Togo Haihachiro baited the Russians into leaving their docks in the Baltic Sea, making them believe they could wipe out the Japanese fleet in one swift attack. The Russian fleet could not reach Japan by the quickest route, through the Strait of Gibraltar, and then the Suez Canal into the Indian Ocean, because these were controlled by the British and Japan was an ally of Great Britain. They had to go around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, adding over more than 6,000 miles to the voyage. Once the fleet passed the Cape, the Japanese spread another false story. They were sailing to launch a counterattack. So the Russians made the entire journey to Japan on combat alert. By the time they arrived, their seamen were tense, exhausted, overworked, whilst the Japanese had been waiting at their ease. Despite the odds and their lack of experience in modern naval warfare, the Japanese crushed the Russians. One added benefit of making the opponent come to you, as the Japanese discovered with the Russians, is that it forces him to operate in your territory. Being on hostile ground will make him nervous, and often he will rush his actions and make mistakes. Let me put this up real quick. I always forget this. Where are we? For negotiations or meetings, it is always wise to lure others into your territory or the territory of your choice. You have bearings whilst they see nothing familiar and are subtly placed on the defensive. Bring them to your office. Tell them to come to you. Tell them to meet you at a place where you are comfortable with. Or even if you don't know the place, simply dictate the terms so that they are coming into your frame as opposed to theirs, wherever possible, of course. Manipulation is a dangerous game. And you know what? Let me touch on this for a moment, seeing as we talk about intersexual relationship dynamics so much. Gentlemen, if you're going to meet a sister, okay, you're going to meet her in a coffee shop, you want to have a meeting, please, for God's sake, if she lives like 2 hours away, do not say to her, you will travel the entire distance all the way to her, such that she has to literally just get up out of her, leave her door, and then walk into the nearest coffee shop right opposite the road. The chivalry inside you will want to do this. You will want to relieve her of the burden of travel, right? Forget that nonsense. She needs to be just as invested in you as you are in her. Make her travel. Make her minimum. She has to meet you halfway. Minimum. And that's only fair. Why? Because now she's investing. She might not be investing money, but she's investing time and whatever money it costs her to get there. But she's investing in the least instance time, which will make her value the meeting with you more. Make her invest, at least in time. And preferably, if you can, get her to come all the way to you. Now she's completely in your frame. You have dictated the terms entirely. But in the least instance, you meet halfway. She needs to invest. If you make it too easy for her, she will not value your time. Do not forget this. Manipulation is a dangerous game. Once someone suspects he's being manipulated, it becomes harder and harder to control him. But when you make your opponent come to you, you create the illusion that he is controlling the situation. He does not feel the strings that pull him, just as Napoleon imagined that he himself was the master of his daring escape and return to power. Everything depends on the sweetness of your bait. If your trap is attractive enough, the turbulence of your enemy's emotions and desires will blind them to reality. The greedier they become, the more they can be led around. And the great con man, Yellow Whale Kid, W-E-I-L. He was born in 1879, died in 1978, I believe. One of the greatest, when I say greatest, one of the most infamous con men in American history. The men who he was able to swindle the most amount of money from were the greediest, always. And he said, I had no mercy, I had no pity on them, I didn't feel sorry for them. It's because they were so greedy that they were such easy targets in the first place. Keep your greed in check. Keep your greed in check. Let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story about myself. I am the type, when I invest, and this weakness of mine was revealed to me by, guess what? Playing Monopoly and Robert Kiyosaki's game. What's the name of his game? Cash Flow. Cash Flow. Is it called Cash Flow? The Rat Race. I've got it up there. Brilliant game. It's a spin-off of Monopoly, just a bit more advanced. And one of my weaknesses, investing weaknesses that were revealed to me time and again, is that whenever I invest, and I do this in real life, but in the game, I will invest all of my cash such that I will be asset rich and cash poor. You might think, oh, but that's smart, Matty. You know, you're not spending it on crap. You're investing it in properties and things like this. That's a great thing, right? No, that is also a form of greed. Yes, and I can't tell you how many times this has landed me in trouble. Why? On the game of Monopoly, where do I land in trouble? As soon as I pick up one of those chance cards and it says you have to pay $50, for example, on each hotel and $100 on each house, maintenance, repairs and things like this. Or I land on another player's hotel property and I got to pay him $900 or whatever the case may be. I ain't got the cash for it. I'm all out. Why? Because I was so greedy trying to get rich by investing heavily it's a form of greed, that I ended up having nothing for the rainy days, for the fines, for the whatever else might be. And that has happened to me in real life as well. That very problem has happened to me in real life, and I'm happy, I'm grateful that early on this mistake was highlighted to me just by flipping a simple board game like Cash Flow, The Rat Race by Robert Kiyosaki, and Monopoly. It revealed one of my investing weaknesses: greed. Over investing and not having enough cash to see you buy the emergency fund is a form of greed as well. It's also greed. Why? Because you're in a hurry to make more money, and you can't hurry the process. You cannot hurry the process. For those of you who are keen on investing, by the way, I thoroughly recommend you play the game Monopoly or Cash Flow. And if you are of the opinion like I am that playing with dice is haram, you can find equivalents. I've got this number generator, random number generator. That's what I use to play Monopoly, electronic thing on my phone. Play the game Monopoly. It will reveal to you your investing weaknesses. And better still, play the game Cash Flow by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a bit more complicated though. Still fun. The great 19th century robber baron Daniel Drew was a master at playing the stock market. When he wanted a particular stock to be bought or sold, driving prices up and down, he rarely resorted to the direct approach. One of his tricks was to hurry through an exclusive club near Wall Street, obviously on his way to the stock exchange, and to pull out his customary red bandana to wipe his perspiring brow. A slip of paper would fall from the bandana, and he would pretend not to notice. The club's members were always trying to foresee Drew's moves, and they would pounce on the paper, which invariably seemed to contain an inside tip on a stock. Word would spread, and members would buy or sell the stock in droves, playing perfectly into Daniel Drew's hands. If you literally controlling the stock market by baiting others, by pretending not to see the piece of paper that fell on the floor, whilst that piece of paper was instructing the other investors around him to do the very thing he wanted them to do. For those of you just joining, make sure you hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Barakallahu feekum. If you can get other people to dig their own graves, why sweat yourself? Pickpockets work this to perfection. The key to picking a pocket is knowing which pocket contains the wallet. Pay attention here. This is fascinating. This is amazing. Experienced pickpockets often ply their trade in train stations and other places where there is a clearly marked sign reading, "Beware of pickpockets." Why? Have a think to yourself before I give you the answer. Why would pickpockets intentionally go to a train station where there are big signs saying "Beware of pickpockets"? Surely this would make it harder for them to pick someone's pocket, right? People are being alerted as to the fact that there are thieves around, and therefore this would make it harder to pick the pocket, would it not? Let's continue. Passersby, seeing the sign, invariably would feel for their wallet to make sure it was still there. For the watching pickpockets, this is like shooting fish in a barrel. Pickpockets have even been known to place their own "Beware of pickpocket" signs to ensure their success. Whenever people would see the sign, they would feel for their pockets to make sure their wallet is still there, and boom! The pickpocket would see and know exactly which pocket to pick. No need to guess. Incredible, right? When you are making people come to you, it is sometimes better to let them know you are forcing their hand. You give up deception for overt manipulation. The psychological ramifications are profound. The person who makes others come to him appears powerful and demands respect. Filippo Brunelleschi, the great Renaissance artist and architect, was a great practitioner of the art of making others come to him as a sign of his power. On one occasion, he had been engaged to repair the dome of Santa Maria del Fiore Cathedral in Florence. The commission was important and prestigious. But when the city officials hired a second man, Lorenzo Ghiberti, to work with Brunelleschi, the great artist brooded in secret. He knew that Ghiberti had gotten the job through his connections, and that he would do none of the work and yet get half of the credit. So what did he do? At a critical moment of the construction then, Brunelleschi suddenly developed a mysterious illness. He had to stop work, but pointed out to the officials that they had hired Ghiberti, who should be able to continue the work on his own, right? Makes sense. Soon it became clear, however, with the absence of Brunelleschi being sick, quote unquote, that Ghiberti himself was useless, and the officials came begging to Brunelleschi. He ignored them, insisting that Ghiberti should finish the project. Until finally they realized the problem. They fired Ghiberti. By some miracle, Brunelleschi recovered within days. He did not have to throw a tantrum or make a fool of himself. He simply practiced the art of making others come to you. If on one, so he didn't complain. He didn't say, oh, that's not fair. That guy, he's not qualified. I'm more qualified. He's not going to do anything. I'm going to do all the work. He simply withdrew. He feigned sickness, withdrew, and then pointed to the fact that this man should be more than qualified to take on the work. And then they realized for themselves that he wasn't. And when they begged him to come back and he insisted, nope, you got your guy, carry on. They realized what the problem was and they fired Ghiberti, which was what Brunelleschi wanted all along, knowing that he was the one going to be doing all the work anyways. So it was only fair. If on one occasion you make it a point of dignity that others must come to you and you succeed, they will continue to do so even after you stop trying. Hanma, appreciate it. Appreciate it, Hanma. Thank you for liking the video. Image. As you know, at the end of each law, we have an image to help you remember the law. The honeyed bear trap. The bear hunter does not chase his prey. A bear that knows it is hunted is nearly impossible to catch and is ferocious if cornered. Instead, the hunter lays traps baited with honey. He does not exhaust himself and risk his life in pursuit. He baits, then waits. Baits, then waits. Yusuf, alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, akhi. Yusuf, if you're free after this, akhi, I'll drop you a text, inshallah, and we'll chop it up. Authority. Good warriors make others come to them and do not go to others. This is by Zhang Yu, by the way, in The Art of War. This is the principle of emptiness and fullness of others and self. When you induce opponents to come to you, then their force is always empty. As long as you do not go to them, your force is always full. Attacking emptiness with fullness is like throwing stones on eggs. Zhang Yu, 11th century commentator on The Art of War. Reversal. As you know by now, if you've been watching for a while, most laws, not all of them, have a reversal to the law, which is a time and a place when application of this law could be detrimental to the power you have accrued, meaning you need to not implement this law. So, reversal. Although it is generally the wiser policy to make others exhaust themselves chasing you, there are opposite cases where striking suddenly and aggressively at the enemy so demoralizes him that his energies sink. Instead of making others come to you, you go to them. You force the issue. You take the lead. Fast attack can be an awesome weapon, for it forces the other person to react without the time to think or plan. With no time to think, people make errors of judgment and are thrown on the defensive. This tactic is the obverse of waiting and baiting, but it serves the same function. You make your enemy respond on your terms. Men like Cesare Borgia and Napoleon used the element of speed to intimidate and control. A rapid and unforeseen move is terrifying and demoralizing. You must choose your tactics depending on the situation. If you have time on your side and know that your enemies are at least at equal strength, then deplete their strength by making them come to you. If time is against you, your enemies are weaker, and waiting will only give them the chance to recover. Give them no such chance. Strike quickly, and they will have nowhere to go. As the boxer Joe Louis put it, he can run, but he can't hide. And you'll notice this in MMA, for those of you who watch MMA or boxing or any type of martial art. If one of the fighters has thrown a punch, for example, or a kick to the head, and he's noticed that it has disoriented the other guy, so the other guy's not knocked out, but it's like he's taken a hit and he's lost himself. You'll notice instantly the guy who threw the punch or kick pounces on him to finish him quickly. So there is a time and a place not to wait and to literally go for the kill. But this is rare. For the most part, you want to make your opponent come to you. Set traps. That's how the master practitioner, even the master martial artist, he sets traps for his opponent to fall into and takes advantage after that. Right. Hope you guys appreciated that, enjoyed that. Inshallah ta'ala, I've got a lot of good podcasts coming up this week. I have a podcast tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala, with Daniel Haqiqatu, the Muslim skeptic. 7 p.m. I'll be creating a thumbnail for that and putting it up shortly. I have a podcast on another brother's channel, I forget his name, on Thursday. And then on Friday, we have the big debate with myself and sister Naima B. Robert on polygyny. Is polygyny appropriate for the 21st century? Is it appropriate for 2021, here in the West in particular? Or should we not do it? Does it not apply anymore? What are your thoughts? And then after that, inshallah ta'ala, I haven't confirmed this yet. No, I'm going to wait until I confirm that. I'm not going to tell you till I confirm that. Yalla, jazakumullah khair, barakallahu feekum, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.